Okay, hello everyone. Our guest today, should you look him up on LinkedIn, has some 40 skills to his name. But what it doesn't list, this is the first time you'll have heard this description, Steve, is dream maker. Stephen Jones is in the business of making other people's dreams a reality. No ordinary dreams either, but the dreams of those who want to do something out of the ordinary, to pull off a feat that will take them way beyond their normal boundaries, both physically and mentally. Whether their dream is perhaps as a youngster to carry out a community project in remote environments for, say, Operation Rally, or for others, perhaps it's to climb one of the 7 peaks, or even ski to a pole. All aspirations to be admired for their purpose and their passion. But whilst these people, whether novice or more experienced, may have all that requisite grit, quite a few of them tend to be lacking in the crucial planning department and all the skills that go with it. And yet this is what's going to help ensure not just their success, but their safety and even survival. As both Stephen and I know, things unravel horribly quickly in any of these extreme environments, and well-intentioned adventurers and expeditioners could be putting not just themselves at unnecessary risk, but others too, without having that experience or knowledge to put together a detailed expedition plan. As Eisenhower said, in preparing for battle, I have always found that plans are useless, but planning is indispensable. And today we're talking to the very man who could be indispensable to your plans, helping anyone who's brave enough to venture into these harsh environments to survive and to succeed. Stephen has worked for over 30 years in remote environments, not just confined to the frozen ends of the planet, but globally too. He's been advisor on risk, crisis management, and I might add, experienced several of these himself, from a terrorist attack to falling off a mountain. Oh, Stephen, couldn't resist that one. One of our unsung heroes behind the great names in the world of exploration. I myself have entrusted him with my life on several exploits, and I'm still around to interview him. So may I introduce you all to, in his own words, the man with a plan. Welcome, Stephen.
Thank you, Rosie.
Steve.
Lovely to be here. And thank you so much for inviting me on the podcast. It's great.
Well, there's a lot of speculation about what you really are. There was a whiff of people saying, "Ooh, is this man a spy?" Because you wear so many different hats. And now we know you've worked in high-risk environments for 30 years. You've led over 30 different expeditions. You've been a polar guide, mountaineer, but it all began behind a city desk in, unimaginably to me, a suit and a tie. What was this all about?
I know you can actually see me, a younger self with some hair, wearing a shirt and tie on the left-hand side there. Yes, so I spent my most of my 20s living in London, working for a variety of finance and banking institutions, whilst going off at weekends, nearly every weekend, rock climbing in summer, ice climbing in winter, and going on expeditions every summer.
So
and
that was already, that passion was already there, which maybe was nurtured in, I think I'm right in saying your childhood was spent on one of the Channel Islands?
Yes, that's right. Yeah, I was born and grew up in Guernsey. This is a view of a bit of a magical south coast of Guernsey and the Channel Islands, which was just a wonderful place to grow up and be a child. And if you've got any art historians in the audience, you might recognise this view because it was also painted several times by Renoir, who came and lived on the island or visited the island many times. And of course, Victor Hugo came and lived on the island, went in exile from France, and wrote several of his famous books there. And you can still visit his house, which is decorated by, well, it's quite eccentric, but it's an amazing place to visit. Yeah, it was a wonderful place to grow up.
So quite a glittering alumni to that particular island. In fact, one of our earlier guests that I was fortunate enough to interview was Colonel John Blashford Snell, and he was brought up on the Channel Islands, as we discovered too. So maybe it's a prerequisite to what's going to come next.
Well, yes, because John Blashford Snell went to school in Jersey, but one of the astonishing things about growing up in Guernsey and then ending up traveling the world and going to the North and South Pole is Guernsey's smaller than Heathrow Airport. It's, a little triangle, 28 square miles, I think it is from memory. And when you live on an island that size, your sense of scale shrinks to fit the island. So going maybe 8 or 9 miles or even 7 miles to one of the far corners of the island would be almost like a special occasion. It'd be a long journey. You wouldn't take the dog for a walk at the furthest points of the island, very often, because it was such a long way to go. And it's funny to have suddenly to have left the island and expanded my own sense of horizon and distance so much.
But maybe that's a good example of what actually makes the Brits good explorers, is this necessary outward looking approach that you have intuitively, and for you also from that sort of size, that small scale, to think big as well. I mean, for starters, how did you make your way into the city? That can't have been easy.
By random chance. So it was really funny. And after a few years, I ended up being a departmental manager in a merchant bank, running the administration of share issues and things, and I'd meet people who were desperate to come and work in the city, and it was their life's ambition to get that sort of job. And I said, oh, I just went to a temping agency and signed on because I needed some work, and
landed on your feet.
And I spent 2 weeks delivering mail and internal mail and operating the photocopying machine at one company, and they recognized I could do more than hit the copy and deliver the internal mail, and they offered me a job. And
presumably you were very good at sorting it out.
That seemed to be the pattern. I mean, and the irony was, every summer I'd ask for unpaid leave, and if they wouldn't give me any leave, then I would hand in my notice to go on an expedition. And there was honestly a pattern over many years of coming back in September, popping in to say hello, I'm still alive, from wherever I'd come back from. And they usually said, well, what are you doing? Well, I'm looking for another job till Christmas or something. And this is right, you've been promoted. You're starting on Monday. But what was great about that time in my life was learning about professional standards and basically high professional standards of conduct and work, and working with some really very, very impressive people who I learned a lot from.
And you also got involved to a degree in the business aspect of risk management, I think, as well. And so at this stage, dealing with the risk of you or your clients losing their shirt, which is symbolic to later in your working life, dealing with people in danger of losing their lives. So what did you take away from that aspect of it? Because it wasn't actually a crisis-free period, was it?
No, well, ironically, the highlight of my time working in finance and banking was dealing with the aftermath of one of the IRA's bombs in April 1993. They detonated the Bishopsgate bomb, which I believe was the largest IRA bomb ever detonated on mainland Britain, or certainly in England, and it went off on a Saturday morning and destroyed huge amounts of damage, millions and millions of pounds worth of damage to Bishopsgate and that area of the City of London. And my office at the time was at 44 Bishopsgate, and I didn't know anything about it on Saturday or Sunday, because I was doing some 24-hour hike around all of the hills in Snowdonia over 3,000 feet high, and only heard about it when I went to the shop to buy a paper on Sunday morning. And then I went to the pre-mobile phone days, went to the phone box to phone my boss, and he said, right, well, I'm going to meet you at this station at 8 o'clock on Monday morning, and we've got some jobs for you. And I'd been identified as the only adventurer or outdoorsy or sort of risk-taking person in the company. And so on Monday morning, I was met at this rendezvous at the tube station, was given a hard hat, a mobile phone, list of things to get, and my job was to talk my way through the police cordon that was being set up or had been set up around the city area, and get into the office building and get some things out that were needed. And that was it was a really interesting time. And sadly, the Bishopsgate bomb wasn't the first major bomb to have gone off in London, and the City of London Police and the Met had really got their systems really dialed, and they basically put metal fences around every road, every footpath, every alleyway around the damaged area to stop looting and secure the place. And after a few days, they'll have a way of signing in to let authorized key holders in, but we couldn't wait. Our backup systems have been brilliant, but there was one computer that hadn't backed up, and the directors' PAs were all running handwritten diaries at the time, and nobody knew what was coming. Nobody knew what was happening. So I had to go and get a list of directors' diaries and one computer. And after some persistent effort, I managed to get my way in, and didn't need the keys because the glass walls and doors were all down, and could just walk in. It was an amazing experience.
So I hardly dare describe it as a Damascus moment, but you must have suddenly realized the importance of planning for the worst possible scenarios, and everyone being aware of that plan. And you must have recognized within yourself an ability to be able to, a clarity of thought, to be able to see the route through this.
I was really impressed because this was working at a place called Close Brothers. I hadn't worked for them when they were on the edge of the St Mary Axe bomb or the Baltic Exchange bomb. But they'd learned a lot from that, and we'd got rented offices, we've got standby offices all ready to go. We'd got our computer systems backed up so brilliantly. At 11 o'clock on Monday morning, we were sitting in replacement offices. We didn't have much furniture, but we were operating as a business. And what was so interesting for me in the aftermath was, looking back, I realized that the safety planning, if you like, had been done really well. But in the aftermath of any incident, which is something I've taken, and learned a lot from since, is the hierarchy and the management structure, the working routines are basically thrown away, or at least temporarily thrown away. And every morning we'd have a morning meeting, standing up and the hierarchy would basically gone with junior people like me there, very senior people, and I had far more contact with directors and people I'd normally have had. And there was just lists of jobs to do, and it was who can do them, who can do this, and you were given jobs and responsibilities based on ability and can-do attitude rather than hierarchy or job title. And some people sank without trace, who had been traumatized, I guess, distressed by what had happened, didn't want to go and see the damaged office, never went back. And other people like me sort of kind of thrived in that situation without perhaps really knowing why. But that was a stepping stone, if you like, to going on and thinking that I actually can find a job and role that is much better, closer fitted to not necessarily values, but to basically to interests and enthusiasms more than anything else.
So you must have learned an awful lot, not just about the practical side of a situation like that and how to steer it and manage it and lead it, but also interestingly when you comment about how some people just couldn't cope with it, the psychology behind people, if you're in a crisis in a remote part of the world, how people react is sometimes completely not as you expect, and that is a great leveler. And some people, I think in a crisis, the problem is everything starts moving very, very quickly, their thought process, and it blurs and they can't respond efficiently. Whereas clearly, I think from the way you described it, you're innately equipped to survive because everything actually mentally slows down, which is nature's wonderful way of giving you the opportunity to think things through and to manage it.
Or maybe the mental processes are slow enough anyway. But for once, an advantage.
But once you'd experienced this, is this what made you think, I can move out of the concrete city and do something that also helps community and people? Because you moved from out of that job into working with Operation Rally?
Yes, well, as I said, my hobbies were rock climbing, ice climbing in winter, and I was just looking around for something to do, and actually met a friend of a friend who worked for what had then changed its name from Operation Rally to Rally International, and I thought this would be amazing. And then I discovered they actually had a paid job, because it's basically a volunteering organisation, that they paid people to be the expedition leaders to plan and run and set up their 3-month multidisciplinary expeditions for young adults, run by a volunteer staff team of older adults. And I thought, oh, this sounds amazing. And I went in to see them and really thought, oh, I could be at home here. And on the second time of applying to be an expedition leader, they gave me the job. And I remember the phone call, which was, we'd like to offer you a job. And yeah, it's fantastic. We said, with all your cold weather experience, we're sending you to Zimbabwe. and I went and had an amazing year and a half in Zimbabwe, and then went on to Uganda, to Malaysia, to Brunei, to Patagonia, southern Chile, to Costa Rica, to Nicaragua. So I spent 7 years doing this, and it was an amazing time.
And these were all
great.
As a sort of refresher for people who perhaps weren't on the Blashford Snell interview, here he is again, because he was the founder of Rally International. But am I correct in saying it was all about bringing in youths from different nations across the world to take on community projects? So I guess anything from assisting on eye cataract operations to building, as you can see here, some sort of school or chapel or something, yeah?
Yes, so the structure of the Rally Expedition experience could be replicated. It was a menu, if you like, a structure that could be replicated in different countries around the world. But the participants were between 17 and 25 years old, who were called adventurers, and they raised money to pay for their place on the expedition if they could. And they come from many different countries, but it's a British-based international organisation. So most of the participants came from Britain, and there were funding schemes to help people who otherwise wouldn't be able to afford to go. So in simplistic terms, you had haves and have-nots from the UK. You had people from lots of different countries, and significant numbers of host country participants. So, Zimbabweans in Zimbabwe and Ugandans in Uganda. And the purpose of it is to take all these people to the other side of the world, or a long way from home, mix them up into small groups, and give them projects with a purpose to work on for about 3 weeks. And then you bring them back to base, muddle them all up, put them into new groups, and they go off and do another project. And each participant would have a bit of training and then take part in 3 different projects. One would be community based, one would be adventure, and one would be environmental science or conservation work. And my job as the expedition leader, with the help obviously of a support team and planning team at head office, was to live in that country and plan and organize the best and most worthwhile projects that I could in the country that I was in. And this picture is one of my, is a high point in my 7 years. This was building a medical clinic on a mountainside on eastern Uganda, on the foothills of Mount Elgon. And this is working in partnership with Care International, big international aid agency, and the Uganda Ministry of Health, and a local village. And we provided human power to carry bricks uphill. There's no road access to this village, no healthcare provision. And it was a really good, effective partnership where we could provide labour Care International provided the expertise and knowledge and got all the permits and everything. And then afterwards, the legacy was this wasn't going to be used as a shed. It was going to be a medical centre, because the Uganda Ministry of Health were signed on to run it and manage it and staff it afterwards. So yeah, that was an example of the sorts of really good, high quality community projects that could be done by basically, unskilled volunteers who were, as long as the job that you'd found for them matched that, something physically hard and demanding, but not necessarily requiring very high skill level. You need to have the skills need to be provided by local people as well.
But teaching young people about how to literally their horizons in every sense, in terms of dealing with different cultures, people from different walks of life, not just the people that they were out there working on a project for, but I imagine that it was a bit of a slice of life, the teams that you took out, and very hard to manage sometimes, because if you were taking maybe some children who'd never even been out to the countryside, let alone out of the country, and then there must have been some testing dynamics to deal with. And also, did you have any crises to contend with? Were there any sort of political disturbances or accidents?
There's yeah, well, back to your Eisenhower quote, we did a lot of planning, and then the planning helps you respond when things go wrong. So every expedition, things went wrong. I remember one we were building. I had a project group meant to be building a bridge across a river up in Murchison Falls, an amazing national park on the Nile in central Uganda, and the supplies hadn't arrived. And we had a shortwave radio net to communicate with all the groups, and we were trying to boost the morale of this project staff team who couldn't build a bridge, but had got this group of highly motivated, hardworking volunteers who didn't know what to do. And one of the other project leaders said, "Well, I suggest you're meant to be crossing the river by a bridge, but you've got no material, so I suggest you start digging a tunnel. That will keep them busy till the bridge material turns up." But every expedition, every place had adventure, and to an extent, an element of risk, particularly with wildlife. So here, this is a Cape hunting dog or African wild dog, and we had several project groups doing conservation or wildlife surveys, walking on foot, with a local ranger doing wildlife surveys. And I once, actually between expeditions, I once had a close encounter with a lioness who was hunting at night, and I was only armed with my Swiss Army knife. We were camped at this game viewing platform that the volunteers had built, and gone to visit it. And then at night, I heard something away from our campfire and walked out to see, and I thought it was going to be elephants, which I'd seen during the day. And a lioness ran past me, stopped and looked at me, and she was 25, 30 feet away from me. I was armed, had my head torch and a Swiss Army knife in my pocket, but was unarmed and on my own. And we just looked at each other. I, looked into each other's eyes for what felt like quite a few minutes, but was a few very long seconds. And I knew what to do. This isn't the safety training is, you mustn't behave like prey. You've got to stand still. You've got to not be afraid.
Well, the pecking order. Yeah,
you've just got to be there. And she didn't quite shrug her shoulders and walked off, but she did. She broke eye contact with me and ambled off. And after that, it was like, but everywhere we went, there was, we'd have encounters with wildlife, and they'd be safe and they'd be managed, and we'd train people how to look after themselves and how to avoid having bad experiences whilst working in amazing places. And this is a game viewing hide built on the national park in Queen Elizabeth National Park in Uganda, which underneath the Ruwenzori Mountains. And there were lion around, but there were snakes, there were buffalo, there's giant forest hogs, there's meerkats, there's all sorts of things running around, and you just learn to deal with it.
Learn the laws of the jungle. Absolutely. And then, having been packed off to literally the jungle, you then made this quantum leap towards the ice, to the other ends of the world. What was the link in that? Was it through your World Extreme Medicine job that you?
No, not yet. That followed on later. But but one of the times I loved was spending best part of 2 years in around the North Patagonian ice cap in Chile, and doing adventures there. And then
with Operation Rally, or
with Rally still, yes. I had this amazing interlude of doing jungle expeditions in Brunei with Rally, but supported by the Bruneian Air Force, and having all sorts of adventures there. But during the time I'd been with Rally and I'm finishing up in Costa Rica and Nicaragua, the only personal expeditions I had time to go on were a couple of short polar expeditions. And this is me on the left at the North Pole in May 1999. And I went on, I was invited to go on this, what's called a last degree expedition, which was my first taste of a polar to one of the poles. I skied across Greenland, I'd been to Spitsbergen, I'd been to lots of other places, but I hadn't been to the Arctic Ocean and North Pole before, and that was just one of the highlights of my life. It was one of the best experiences that I'd ever had up to that point, and I fell in love with that. And so when and the leader on this is Pen Haddo, who's standing in the middle, who was our guide and leader, and it was really interesting. With lots of parallels to the expeditions I'd done before, but with more esoteric and more expensive logistics. Instead of Land Rovers, we were moving to ski-equipped Twin Otters, and learning how to travel around on the Arctic Ocean. Mm-hmm. And then that led me eventually to getting a job as a guide, looking after a group of people in Antarctica. And when I went down there, they offered me a job and said, at the end of the month I was there, we'd like you to stay till the end of the season. Please, can you sign on this dotted line, and we're going to take you on for the next 2 months to work at our base in Antarctica.
And as at the base in Antarctica, I think you were the field operations manager. And perhaps this picture, it brings back lots of memories of. I remember all that sort of scene at Patriot Hills, but perhaps you could describe this huge base, Patriot. Well, it wasn't huge then. Patriot Hills, to some of the listeners.
Yes, so I started. I did 3 years as a guide and assist and a remote base camp manager. Then became a field operations manager in charge of the base, and it's working for an American company called Antarctic Logistics and Expeditions, which kind of does what it says on the tin, and it provides it basically runs an international airline, if you like, between southern Chile and its own private base in Antarctica, as you see here at Patriot Hills, where we were until 2010. And it does support work for the national Antarctic programs or science research programs of lots of different countries. It flies in our own visitors and tourists to do touristic adventures. You can fly to the South Pole, you can go and visit emperor penguins. We do support work for other adventure travel companies who bring in their own clients to go and ski or climb. And we run our own guided expeditions, like skiing the last degree to the South Pole. And
so you might just explain to some of the people listening what you mean by a last degree.
So so if you think of the lines of longitude and latitude that make up the geography of our global navigation system, latitude are the horizontal lines, with including the equator, and if you ski each degree of latitude is a fixed distance apart, unlike lines of longitude. And 1 degree of latitude is 60 nautical miles, or 111 kilometers. So, but skiing the last degree to the South Pole, you're flown or travel to 89 degrees south, and you ski and travel the 1 degree of latitude, the 60 nautical miles, over a week or so, to 90 degrees south, the South Pole.
Then I'm going to come back to that in a minute, but and the difference between the last degree contingency and the full length endeavors. But your picture before with the planes landing, I remember how thrilling it was when one first flies over, or anytime one flies over to Antarctica, which is a long flight from the nearest landmass, Punta Arenas, at the very bottom of Chile. And you used to fly in a Hercules, now an Aleutian, which lands on the ice strip, correct?
Yes, now a 757. You have to come back. It's your passengers flying a 757 now. But yeah, for many years it was an Aleutian 76, which we still with cargo aircraft you saw in that picture. But we still have those for flying equipment and cargo and vehicles. But you're right. It's exciting civil aviation. You know, you're landing a big wheeled aircraft on a blue ice runway on it's naturally occurring section of blue ice upon which we blow the snow off or keep the snow off it to keep it as an operational runway.
Yes, it's a very noisy landing, and there you are when you get into the Aleutian. You know, the seats aren't covered. Imagine a room without the plastering, without the wallpaper, without the furniture. It's a gutted aeroplane, so you can see all the wires and tubes, and all you can sit on is a sort of metal casing down the side with, if you're lucky, there's some sort of a strap, or otherwise you have to, like I did, strap yourself onto all the netting over the cargo in the center of the plane. And the only window that you have, and it's probably a good thing you can't see, is the bomber window at the bottom.
Well, yes, happily that's slightly out of date now, because for many years we've been flying passengers in proper airline seats, for forward-facing airline seats in the front of the aircraft, put the cargo behind. But as you know, for last now it's passenger aircraft 757 and normal. But it was part of the adventure flying inside
part of the adventure
of the Aleutian. I love those aircraft. They're
yeah. And Hercules, they're great characters. But when you were actually running ALE at Patriot Hills, that was quite a tall order, wasn't it? Because you were dealing with such a diverse bunch of people, from the pilots to the clients. So tell us a little bit more about that and the pilots. I mean, you literally, it was the wild west of the South wild.
It's one of the remotest, most isolated little communities on earth for 3 months each year, from the beginning of November through December to the end of January, in the austral summer. So it's 24 hours of daylight. And my job was to manage and lead a fairly sizable staff team of people who were effectively running a polar airport, a polar hotel, and guest experience, and a polar garage. You know, we have mechanics and engineers and people to fix vehicles and drive skidoos and snow machines and operate heavy machinery to clear the runway. So it was a really amazing mix of people. From up to about, the staff alone would come from at least 15 different countries.
Yes.
And so it was an amazing place. And then everybody coming has either paid a lot of money, it's very expensive to get there, they've either paid a lot to come and do something which means a lot to them, or they've worked really hard to get sponsorship and funding to finance their expedition or their research project. So everybody there is really interesting to talk to and is doing something that means an awful lot to them. And that was this really interesting, a bit like the rally experience was, but with a decimal point moved in terms of costs. Yes. You've got people, it's an amazing mix of place and people and purpose, which come together to make it a really, really special place to be.
And given that, particularly with one's mind on expeditioners who have spent maybe up to 2 years, in my experience, raising the funds, training, trying to get the whole thing together, what do you do when you're responsible for the pilots' operations and their lives, and you look at a client and think, they're not up to the job. The plan's not right, the training hasn't been done. What is the plimsoll line of your responsibility there? Can you stop them?
Well, that leads beautifully to the job I do now, and I'm no longer managing the base in our winter, is I do the job all year round. I used to do in the off season, which is be the point of contact for expedition planning. So if you want to come on an expedition to Antarctica through us, then I'm a main point of contact. And what I say to people is, I don't say, no, you can't come, you haven't got enough experience. It's much easier to say not yet. And here is a pathway to doing more training, going to Greenland or Spitsbergen or Norway or wherever it is, and here's a shopping list of experiences, an experience I think you need to gain over the next 2 years. and then come back when you're ready and you've got weeks and weeks of sled hauling experience, if that's what we're going to do. So now we shouldn't be in a position where we've got somebody in Antarctica who isn't up to the job. And if we do, well, we pick them up and give them the support that they need. And we're not there to police them. We're there to provide support and safety cover and to enable and facilitate rather than to say no. But we, as a logistics company, we've got safety responsibility, which we take really seriously.
Yes, because I can imagine that there's a lot of people who maybe turn up with the Gucci kit, but not necessarily, they might have the kit, but not the grit, so to speak. And when you look at that, maybe somebody has put in all the training and got the appropriate equipment, but underneath it all, what do you think it really takes for a full-length endeavour, from Patriot Hills or from the edge of the sea ice all the way to the geographic pole? What does it take?
It's a very significant physical challenge to ski, pulling a sled with a couple of overweight people sitting in the bath behind you, effectively, in terms of weight, for 40, 50 days, perhaps even longer on some expeditions towards the South Pole, living in continuously in sub-zero temperatures. It's not like skiing in a ski resort where you can stop and have a hot drink and go back to your chalet or hotel room at the end of the day. You've got to put a tent up. It's physically extremely demanding. It requires a huge amount of, it takes at least a year, probably 2 years of physical training to get ready. It requires a lot of personal skills to be ready to operate in that environment safely, because if you make a single mistake, you can get frostbite or cold injury and it can be the end of the expedition. And it requires a lot of grit, a lot of tenacity and mental strength and psychological well-being to operate in such a harsh environment. But it's also it's a dull environment in many ways. Once you're skiing on the polar plateau with nothing above the horizon, you're skiing all day, and you could turn around and look as if you haven't moved a centimeter.
Yes.
The view is the same day after day up on in many parts, and that requires, a mental. It's a bit like rock climbing. It requires mental and physical ability and resilience, and that's it's a major undertaking.
I think it's very interesting, actually, because when I'm sort of not assessing but looking at other people's ability to cross Antarctica, because on the Arctic it's so different, you're concentrating all the time on the Arctic because it's fast moving, there's action, there's
Yes.
you react and think ahead. Whereas Antarctica, as you described, in that sort of vast scale that it is, it's almost a monastic way of life, and you're completely covered and wrapped up. So even if you're in a team, not on your own, you can't hear anything except for the elements and that wind all the time. You need to have an almost childlike ability to conjure up that theatre of the mind so you can keep yourself occupied.
Yes, absolutely. A lot of people listen to music or bring earphones and music playing devices, or listen to audiobooks or podcasts. But almost all the expeditioning I've done as a guide, I won't don't give myself that luxury. I want to hear what's going on, and I want to every elemental clue I can get as to evolving situations or developing situations. So I'm never listening to music, but some people while away for days listening to audiobooks of all of Harry Potter again or something, and passing the time.
It is not unlike sailing, isn't it? I mean, sometimes it's all sort of Côte d'Azur and calm, and you can listen to something like that, unlike the Arctic. Or other times it's more sort of Bay of Biscay, and it's stormy and wild, and your heart is racing because you're coming up to a crevasse field, and you can't see anything because it's a whiteout and you're coming up to a crevasse field. So it sort of lurches from one contrast to another. And of course, some people get very worn down psychologically by this. And Steve, whether you're with them, guiding them, or whether you're acting as base camp manager from afar, what are the clues that you are looking for during your communications with these people that might give away the sign that there's trouble brewing?
It's really interesting. Skiing along on a polar expedition, you're creating data points in terms of how far you've skied, how long it's taken you each day, which to you as the person on that expedition pulling that sled, all you're seeing is, I've skied so many miles or kilometers today in so many hours, and I've got, I've bitten off this much chunk of the total journey. But for a base camp support team, they can look at those numbers, and for having been looking at these numbers for years and years and years, I can tell straight away whether somebody's doing well and whether they're doing badly or not. I know what a good day looks like in terms of how long it takes and how fast they're skiing and how many kilometers they'll have traveled in a day. And after say 2 weeks of travel, everybody's got their own pattern. They'll have established their routine. They get up at this time. They'll leave at 2 hours later. They'll ski for 8 or 9 hours or whatever it is, and they've got an established benchmark of what an average day for them looks like. And if they suddenly start skiing slower and slower and slower, or extending the days to make the distance, you know that there's something going wrong. And that's just before you even talk to them. And one of the fundamental things that we do, and I try to do on every expedition everywhere, is to have not just messages, but just hear the human voice at the other end of a satellite phone every day, and just have a quick call to check in with them. And you can hear so much from a tone of voice about morale, health, well-being, arguments within the team, just whilst they're reading out the numbers of their latitude and longitude, or whatever it is. So just a combination of a bit of data about the traveling, and tone and pitch and sound of our voices gives away so much. And then we can dive into the conversation and ask questions for what the issues are and how we can then help and support and give boost to morale, or technical support, and how to clean the stove to get it to start working again, whatever's needed.
Touche. Problems that you've fished me out of, but it's difficult. It's a real skill to have as a base camp manager, because in my experience, a lot of the time, I think that we probably, from the ice, and after a while of being on the ice, one's voice actually sounds quite drunk, because all your neural system is slowing down, because it's sending all the messages through to your organs to protect you there. So you tend to speak with possibly a bit of a slur, and definitely more slowly in the cold. And you're therefore thinking more slowly. But I guess you're looking for all those sort of assiduous attention to the detail in logging all the information you said about your daily routine, your patterns, etc.
Yes.
But on the receiving end, from my perspective to you, it is also another skill to the base camp manager to give you the right feedback, to feed you the right, you've got to go A, B, C through all the vital communications, your position, the conditions, your condition, kit conditions, all the rest. And then whether you feed through some of those messages from supporters, etc., which is a crucial sort of nutrition for the motivation.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And quite often there will be a support team of watchers, of family members, people who've been on expedition with that individual before, who might be contacting me in the background and saying, "Oh, I'm a bit concerned about how they're doing today," or I might get some other information. Nowadays, most people are blogging or sending back pictures, are recording video, recording audio diaries onto their website from remotest parts of the world. And all of that gives us more information that we analyze and look at very carefully. So if people are maybe saying that they've got no health problems, but I've seen they've posted a picture on their website showing that a frostbitten nose or discolored fingertips, then we would that gives us a cue to ask them about that, and to follow up to make sure they've got medical care.
Or things like burn marks on the side of the tent.
Yeah, the hole in the tent that wasn't there before. And then you're absolutely right. You're judging what's needed in terms of Do people need a a verbal hug, or do they need a kick up the bum to get on?
Yes, yes, absolutely. And in fact, could I be right in saying that whilst we as an expeditioner might be feeling that we're making our way, we're so nearly there, but you sense alarm bells going off, the person on the ice is not the best equipped person to make a judgment on their own condition when you've been on the ice for quite a long time.
Yeah, I think that's right, and that's certainly it's one of the big advantages of not being on your own. And
yes,
it's fascinating to me as an expedition manager and facilitator of people going on the remotest expeditions possible, that thanks probably to you and your inspiration, people are going on solo trips and think that that's the if like the zenith of personal challenge is to do that journey solo. And of course you've got no reality check there. You've got nobody to tell you that your balaclava's a bit skew with and there's a bit of skin showing. The risks of illness, or the consequences of illness, of the risks of carbon monoxide poisoning in your tent, risk of crevasse, incidents with crevasses, all of those are just much, much worse and much more serious solo than if you've got just one other person with you, if they're hopefully vaguely competent.
Logically too. I mean, that's why I would love to ask another polar soloist actually whether they had an alter ego like I did. As you know, I had what I call the field marshal, who was another voice, who laughed with me, instructed me, a great traveling companion. What is impossible sometimes to judge, though, is that because one becomes so inured to extreme fatigue, hunger, and pain as well, that it's very difficult to realistically assess your physiological condition. And an unhappy example of this, if you're happy to talk about it, was wonderful Henry Worsley. Now, you were involved in that tragedy, I think, because he was on the ice trying to complete his trilogy, really, of polar expeditions. And he was so close. He had done 900 nautical miles, I think. And he was so close to the finishing line. And then what happened?
Yes, I mean, Henry Worsley's a great name in modern Antarctic and polar expeditions. He'd skied on the two historic routes from Captain Scott Shackleton's route from Ross Island across the Ross Ice Shelf as either Spain and up the Beardmore Glacier to the pole with two other people. And on an expedition he led. He came back 3 years later in 2011 and led two army teams, one on Shackleton's Scott's route, one on Roald Amundsen's route, again across the Ross Ice Shelf and up the Axel Heiberg Glacier to the pole. And so he skied the Norwegian route on that time. So he became the first person ever to travel both the Captain Scott and Roald Amundsen's historic routes to the South Pole. And he came back a few years later on a solo crossing. And as you said, it was as we said earlier on, these expeditions are very tough on your body, and tragically he was ill. He had an illness, but he had some medical condition which we don't know whether he knew about it. I personally don't think he knew he had anything seriously wrong with him. He just thought he was run down, and after a couple of months of pulling a sled every day, I think everything hurts. So you've got one more bit of hurt. Well, you don't necessarily think it's a medical issue. And he basically ran out of time and hadn't quite got to the end of the expedition route.
Well, when you say he ran out of time, which means all sorts of things, because it means, was he running out of rations and fuel as well?
Well, it was coming to the end of the Antarctic season, and he hadn't quite got all the way down onto the Ross Ice Shelf through the mountains that he was going to. So we had a conversation with him over 2 or 3 days. He was slowing down and we we positioned an aircraft near him and picked him up, brought him back to our base, where he saw a doctor and thought, oh crikey, there's something badly wrong with you now. But luckily the big jet aircraft was already on its way in from Punta Arenas, so he put him on the flight and flew him with one of our doctors back to hospital in Chile, where he had lots of examinations to try and work out to come up with a diagnosis. And tragically, he got peritonitis and died from multiple organ failure in hospital in Chile a few days later.
Peritonitis in the hospital in Chile, so he didn't have peritonitis on the ice.
I presume he did, but tragically, we will never really know.
Although one would like to happily conclude that I think that, given that, what did he have left to do? 30 nautical miles.
No, it was actually over 100.
Oh, it was over 100. Do you think that had he not been ill, would he have made it?
If he hadn't been ill, yes, he may well have done. But it's fascinating as a sort of bit of modern life, if you like. The information was sent out incorrectly that he had about 30 miles to go, and he had more than that, just about 120 miles to go. I think it was, from memory, 112 or something. But that was published around the world. And now, if you Google Henry, you'll find he had 30 miles to go, which he didn't. But that fact is now out on the internet. You can't undo it now.
Yes,
no. But he was, he's one of the most impressive people I've ever worked with, and had the pleasure of working with and supporting on, helping him with the planning on all three of his expeditions.
Yeah.
It's just
a sort of icon, a giant of his time. And what was so wonderful, I think, has been his legacy, because as opposed to any criticism coming forth as a result of these expeditions, that actually he's highly respected and seen as inspirational figure for his purpose, passion and grit, and old-fashioned values which just still hold good, of valor and fortitude, and thinking that on his last communications he was talking about his charity and his supporters really puts it into perspective. And
yes,
which brings one round, because we're running out of, I knew this would happen. I knew we'd run out of time. We really needed double the amount of time. But anyway, we haven't even talked about our shared experiences. But do you think that expeditions and explorations of this day and age are still worth it? Very important question to me. And if they are, in what capacity? What is important about them?
I've got 2 slides to show you as an answer. I think expeditions can have a purpose, and they can be individual personal challenge, or they can have a wider purpose. And if you think about the world and geographical knowledge, we need geographical knowledge about the changes to the countryside, the landscape, to every area of where there's life on Earth, from jungles to mountains to glaciers to ice caps. We need more knowledge about what's happening and the rate of change and risks of habitat loss and biodiversity than we've ever needed before. So this is the time to go on expeditions and to bring back geographical knowledge. And people care about things that they know about, and so there's immense value in communicating that knowledge and the need to let people know. We want everybody watching this podcast to know about, for example, pick a list of issues about habitat loss affecting, mountain gorillas in Africa, or deforestation of the Amazon, and Jair Bolsonaro's deforestation policies in Brazil is going to have an impact on us and on world weather. So if people come back and they from travel with purpose and share knowledge and enthusiasms about what's going on in the rest of the world where most people don't go, then that's, I think, immensely valuable. And the world's bits of wilderness need us to care about them in order to value them and for them to be protected. And our wildlife habitat particularly needs protection, and we need to understand the impact of our diets on farming and the pressure and squeeze on all the wildlife compared with the number of farming animals and so on. So there's a huge amount to learn, and this, you think the world has been explored, but it hasn't. We need to know more about everywhere now than we've ever needed before. So I think there's huge time for people to go off and do, whether it's a Raleigh International type expedition or a polar expedition, and reporting back from the world's wildernesses. This is the time to do it.
Yes, and the purpose has got to be greater than the individual dream. And I couldn't agree more with you on that note. And in fact, I have to say that from my own experience in my early expeditions, which began as the thrill of making history, of leaving a footprint in the snows of time, in other words,
Yes.
a bit of self-glory, have evolved very quickly with turning that on its head. And now the mission is to go to somewhere where one can serve the purpose of finding out more about that particular environment, and coming back and sharing the knowledge and the research and reporting it, in your words.
Yes, absolutely.
Stephen, thank you so much. We're going to have to leave a little room for questions, I think, which are flooding in. And we might go a little bit over time, if that's all right with all of you, with the questions. But I'd like to just sum up by saying you really are actually the quiet unsung hero behind so many important expeditions and endeavours. And you're really the champion of the original and unchanging values of true endeavour, which of course include purpose, passion and grit, but also honesty and merit, and leaving behind every expedition a legacy that is worth sharing with everybody else who can benefit from it. So thank you very much.
Oh, thank you, Rosie.
I'm going to proceed you with questions, if I can get up my chat column here.
Would you like me to stop sharing my screen or leave this one on?
Yes, and then when we finish the questions, I have a surprise photograph. Actually, Ben,
sorry, Rosie, was that yes, stop sharing, or yes, leave it up?
Stop sharing.
Okay.
And then I can hopefully get my questions up.
Okay, lovely.
Here we go, everyone. Right. Oh, look, somebody, Emma Maparazzi, I hope I've pronounced that correctly, says, so proud to know you visited my country, Zimbabwe. I hope you had a lovely time. Angie says that she's friends with that's Henry Worsley's mother, Sally. Such a terrible loss, but his whole family would never have dreamed of trying to stop him from attempting to fulfill his ambition. Absolutely, Angie, we couldn't agree more. And in fact, I remember having conversations with Joanna at a later stage during the expedition when he was on the ice. It wasn't quite the dire stage, and whether for better or for worse, I said, you must let Henry continue for as long as he can. He's doing a great thing. So thank you, Angie.
And can I just jump in there? Because of course, no one goes, well, Henry was a sound mind and body. He wouldn't have gone on that expedition, and he'd have stopped at the very first sign if he thought he had any serious risk to his health or well-being. He was unfortunate enough to have a medical emergency, but he could have had at home. You can he didn't have appendicitis, but you can think of appendicitis striking down anybody who's got an appendix at the least convenient time, which is why if you're going to become an astronaut, we probably can take your appendix out before you go.
I think Rand Fiennes had to abort a mission when he got kidney.
Gallstones.
Gallstones, that was it. Yes, absolutely. Anything can happen. That's why it's terribly important to have your teeth checked before you go on an expedition as well. Kim Holland would like to know if your parents were adventurers.
Oh, yeah, my father was a climber, but he and an alpinist and an expedition doctor, but he'd given up doing all of that before I was born. But my grandparents' generation had many of what I guess would now be described as sort of empire builders, as sort of railway engineers and medical missionaries. And one of my great aunts ran a girls' school in Calcutta for many years, and so was quite a lot of family of previous sort of overseas adventures and stuff, and projects with purpose. But how much of them were an influence, I don't know.
Well, they left their footprint, didn't they, by doing all that good work.
Yeah.
And Emma would like to know if you've got a book out.
Not yet.
Would I?
I'm trying to find the time to write one.
Is he? I tell you what, though, Emma, and indeed everyone, that I'm sure if you Google Stephen Jones, not the musician, but underneath expeditions, isn't it, Steve?
Yeah.
Do you have a list of any forthcoming talks which you might be doing and things like that? Because that's always very interesting. So,
well, I'm always I love doing things like this and talking and sharing my experiences with different audiences, and I'm really available and love coming to speak. So if you need a speaker or want one, then contact me through my website or LinkedIn or Rosie or anybody else. I'd be pleased to help.
I have Greedy Pops here has a question for you before we finish, which is, I think I read somewhere that when somebody said, what would be your dream expedition if budget wasn't an issue? And you said Mount Marilyn, which is the wife of the commander on Apollo 13, was it?
It's Jim Lovell's wife. On
the moon somewhere, isn't it?
Yeah, I don't know. I can't remember when I said that, but I needed to come up with an answer. What's your dream expedition? But that wasn't actually giving anything away as to what my current then future plans were. So came up with this. I thought it's and Jim Lovell and the NASA, the Apollo astronauts were huge inspiration and to me, and I love the idea that Jim Lovell's wife's got a mountain named after her on the moon. So I thought
I think you should have a mountain in Antarctic edition named after you. So one more little sub question then is, what is your next plan, or are you not going to say?
Well, as you've heard, in essence, my life has really evolved from going on stuff of my own enjoyment in mountaineering and polar expeditioning to leading others and facilitating the experience of others. And now my reward is helping people plan and prepare thoroughly and well to go and make their own polar expeditions and other projects a success.
You have so often for me, and maybe that'll be another job for you in the near future, is my next expedition. Now, Ben, I don't know if you can hear me, but if you can put up that surprise slide.
Oh gosh, what's going?
There we go. And we should enter a competition as to
caption competition.
Fill in the caption. But I think you deserve a lot of recognition, Steve Jones. You're certainly one of my heroes from the expedition world, and on behalf of everyone, we would like to thank you very much for an absolutely enthralling and very informative interview. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you, Rosie, and thank you to everybody else who's joined us today. Thank you so much. It's been great.
And I'll be in touch about the next expedition. Okay. Bye-bye. Bye, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Bye, Stephen.
Bye-bye.